Next item on the agenda is a debate under the urgent procedure on deportations and forcible transfers of Ukrainian children and other civilians to the Russian Federation or to Ukrainian territories temporarily occupied, create conditions for their safe return, stop these crimes, and punish the perpetrators. You find it in document 15748. It will be presented by Mr. Paulo Pisco on behalf of the Committee on Migration, Refugees and Displaced Persons. We shall also hear an oral opinion from Madam Carmen Leite on behalf of the Committee on Social Affairs, Health and Sustainable Development. After the rapporteurs, Madam Olena Zelenska, the First Lady of Ukraine, will make her statement. Madam Zelenska will address us online. In order to finish by 5:30, we will have to interrupt the list of speakers at about 5 p.m. to allow time for the reply and a vote on the draft resolution recommendation. Now, first I call Mr. Pisco, the rapporteurs. You have 7 minutes now and 3 minutes at the end to reply. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chairman. Madam Olena Zelenska, let me express, first of all, my gratitude for your participation in the discussion of this so crucial report. Dear colleagues, in one of her many incriminatory declarations, the Russian Commissioner for the Rights of Children, Maria Lvova-Belova, said, and I quote, "Now that the children have become Russian citizens, temporary guardianship can become permanent." Madam Belova was just following the plans and objectives announced by Mr. Putin in his speech of 21 February, 3 days before the war, stating that Ukraine was inalienable part of the Russian land. That speech shows very clearly what Mr. Putin had in mind. The deportation of and forcibly displaced children are a tragedy into the tragedy of this war, full of massacres and helpless civilian populations, bombing of hospitals, maternities, schools, and water and energy plants, rape and torture, blocking of humanitarian corridors. This report focuses in describing and denouncing the practices of deportation and forcibly transfers of children and civilians and the breaches in the international law considering the possible crime of genocide. The exact numbers of deported children are not known, but it is realistically possible that several 100,000 children were illegally taken to Russia, Belarus, and occupied territories. Russian authorities have stated that close to 800,000 Ukrainian children went in Russia, which is more than the double of the number supposed by Ukrainian authorities as being deported. As until so far, only about 20,000 children have been identified as being deported, and less than 400 have returned to Ukraine. We must then ask, where are all the other hundreds of thousands of children? Therefore, it is of utmost importance to know exactly how many children have effectively been deported, their names and whereabouts, and in which living conditions they are. We need to know how many have been adopted by Russian families and how many are in re-education centers. All deported children must recuperate their personal identification, establish contact with families or legal guardians to be able to return home, including those who were in orphanages or pediatric institutions whose parents have been arrested, killed, or were in other situations. The Council of Europe, United Nations, European Union, the next Reykjavik summit should have an active role in the efforts to help Ukrainian authorities to urgently bring back home all children and in creating conditions to have an effective reparation for loss and damage in general. Children are traumatized. They are being dispossessed of their identity and can't return home alone, just by themselves. They need help. They need our help. Many of the children are being subjected to a process of Russification. It's a huge violence to replace an identity for another, forcing them to absorb the Russian culture, language, and values to become good patriots. The Humanitarian Research Lab of Yale identified at least 43 re-education camps in Russia, in occupied Crimea and Belarus, where at least 6,000 Ukrainian children were detained, in 2 of them with military training, probably to fight against their own people. The practice of deportation of children started already before the war and became more intense after the full-scale invasion. President Putin is in the head of the organization with the precious help of the devoted and very mediatic Commissioner Lvova-Belova, together with members of the federal government, regional governors, and local authorities, showing the evidence of a state policy with a clear structure and organization dedicated to the deportations and forcibly transfers of children. We all have seen proofs as propaganda actions with Mr. Putin and Madame Belova defending legal changes for a rapid acquisition of Russian nationality for Ukrainian children. Russian families with smiling faces receiving at the same time for adoption 2, 3, 4, and even 5 children in exchange of a monetary compensation. Children have reinforced protection under international law. In these practices of persistent deportation, we can see an inhuman intention to destroy Ukrainian identity, with grave human and legal consequences. In these practices, together with the monstrous process of Russification, we see elements of the crime of genocide, considered the crime of crimes, for the complete denial to children the right to have an identity, a culture, and a normal and safe familiar environment in their own country. The 1948 Genocide Convention, Article 2E, and the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court in Article 6E states very clearly that the deportation of forcibly transfers of children from one group to another is one of the elements of the crime of genocide. We therefore congratulate the arrest warrants issued against Mr. Putin and Madame Belova, recalling that many others with similar responsibilities should also be investigated in the light of possible crimes of genocide. With this report, the Council of Europe is accomplishing its most noble mission of defending human rights, accountability for those who committed war crimes, and the right of people to live in peace and security. Deportation of children must stop, as well as forced adoptions, illegal imposition of Russian nationality, and re-education and Russification must stop. All children must return to their homes or to a safe third country. To finish, let me thank to all those that have worked in this report, the Migration Committee Secretariat in first place, experts, our Spanish colleague, and the delegations who gave their contributions, and all the colleagues that will participate in this debate, aiming for the best interest of children and the respect of human rights and international law. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rapporteur. Thank you, Paulo. Madam Zelenska is already online, so she is already following our debate. But first, before giving her the floor, I now give the floor to Madam Carmen Leijt, the Rapporteur of the Committee on Social Affairs, Health and Sustainable Development, to present an oral opinion on behalf of that committee. Carmen, you have 3 minutes.
Gracias, señor presidente. Voy a hablar en español. Buenas tardes, queridos colegas. Me gustaría empezar elogiando al señor Pisco por su buen documentado informe sobre las deportaciones y traslados forzosos de civiles ucranianos y, sobre todo, por haber hecho hincapié en la dramática situación de los niños ucranianos deportados y trasladados a la fuerza a Rusia o a territorios ucranianos ocupados por Rusia. Ante esta tragedia, me complace compartir su análisis y las aportaciones que ha hecho del señor Pisco, aun reconociendo que serán muy difíciles de llevar a cabo en tiempos de guerra, pero vale la pena hacer todo lo posible por conseguirlo. Sus propuestas y el debate constructivo que mantuvimos me han llevado a apoyar plenamente el proyecto de resolución y de recomendación propuestos, haciendo innecesario un dictamen escrito y enmiendas. Quisiera destacar 3 puntos que para mí son de la mayor importancia. En primer lugar, poner fin a estos crímenes y conseguir una repatriación segura de los niños y personas afectadas. Condeno enérgicamente la agresión de la Federación Rusa contra Ucrania, contra su pueblo, contra sus niños. En toda guerra, los niños son los más vulnerables. Los niños se enfrentan a un miedo inimaginable. Los niños sufren daños físicos y psicológicos. Sus derechos fundamentales se violan constantemente. Este daño aumenta exponencialmente en el caso de los niños que están siendo deportados o trasladados por la fuerza a Rusia o a territorios de influencia rusa, porque se les priva de su identidad, de su cultura, de sus creencias y de su nacionalidad. E incluso muchos de esos niños son dados en adopción a familias rusas. En una palabra, se les reeduca, iniciándose un proceso conocido como rusificación con el fin de que olviden sus orígenes. Los niños no pueden ser botín de guerra. Su bienestar y el acceso a la protección y a los cuidados deben ser una prioridad para las autoridades europeas y nacionales, para la comunidad internacional y para todos nosotros. En todas las sociedades, los niños son el bien más preciado, son nuestro futuro, el futuro de nuestros pueblos, de nuestra sociedad. Por ello, la prioridad es detener las deportaciones y los traslados forzosos de civiles y niños. La segunda prioridad es identificar y localizar a los niños víctimas de estas deportaciones. El establecimiento de un mecanismo rápido para identificar, localizar y repatriar a las víctimas es un requisito previo a la repatriación. Según los últimos datos, se están deportando a más niños que los aún documentados oficialmente por las autoridades ucranianas. Va a ser un proceso complicado, pero hay que poner todos los medios para poder llevarlo a cabo, para evitar o al menos minimizar los daños. La comunidad internacional y los Estados miembros del Consejo de Europa deben apoyar a las autoridades ucranianas en el desarrollo de un mecanismo seguro para identificar, localizar y repatriar a las víctimas a Ucrania o a un tercer país seguro. Como médico que soy, quiero subrayar la necesidad de proporcionar a los niños que regresen los cuidados de emergencia y apoyo psicológico continuado, que serán cruciales para reparar sus daños de los niños deportados, porque se han visto privados de sus derechos humanos básicos y han sufrido mucho, lógicamente. Este mecanismo es una condición sine qua non y estoy de acuerdo con el señor Pisco en que la llamada plataforma Niños de la Guerra debe reforzarse. El tercer punto es llevar a los culpables ante la justicia. Quiero subrayar que es una necesidad crucial de llevar a los autores ante la justicia, a todos los niveles de responsabilidad, ya sea ante tribunales internacionales o nacionales. Europa tiene que asegurarse de que la Federación Rusa rinda cuentas por todos los crímenes de guerra, crímenes contra la humanidad y crímenes de genocidio que cometa Ucrania. Como guardián de los derechos humanos, la democracia y el Estado de Derecho en la región, el Consejo de Europa tiene un papel fundamental. No debemos permitir que ninguno de estos crímenes quede impune. Muchas gracias al equipo de secretariado y especialmente a Yannick Debó por su inestimable ayuda, también a la Comisión de Asuntos Sociales por haber delegado a mí su opinión y también a los intérpretes por su gran labor. Les agradezco mucho su atención. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Madam Rapporteur. Thank you very much, dear Carmen. May I now formally welcome to our debate the First Lady of Ukraine, Madam Olena Zelenska. Dear Madam Zelenska, we are grateful that you are able to join us today to address our Assembly. And we now see you on the screen. May I again welcome you, seeing you over there. We just were talking about the road to Reykjavik. Now we have found the road to Kiev, and we are more than happy that you are able and willing to participate in this so important debate. As the President of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, I would like to reconfirm once again our solidarity with Ukraine and the Ukrainian people, and to express the Council of Europe's condemnation of Russia's aggression against your country, our member state. The Council of Europe was the first international organization, as you surely will know, that suspended membership of the Russian Federation only one day after the beginning of the war of aggression and expelled Russia less than 3 weeks later. And we remain, I tell you, fully committed to the support and assist Ukraine in all possible ways to ensure that the war ends, territorial integrity of your country is restored within its internationally recognized borders, individuals responsible for war crimes are brought to justice, and your beautiful country is reconstructed. Madam Zelenska, the position of this assembly is clear. This war should never become a normality to us. We should defy the temptation to get used to it. But instead, we should do our utmost not to ever forget about the suffering the Ukrainian people are undergoing. Just this morning, I saw in the news about yet another bombing of a residential area in the city of Mykolaiv by the Russian army that took away, again, at least one life and severely injured several dozens of persons, including young children. And we remember that these are not statistical numbers, but as your Nobel Peace Prize winner, Madam Matvichuk, said in her address to our assembly, there is an entire destroyed universe for the family and friends behind every victim. Today, Madam Zelensky, we will discuss the situation of Ukrainian civilians forcibly displaced to Russia, and will put a particular focus on children abducted by the Russian forces. This issue is clearly one of the most horrifying in this war. We strongly support, Madam Zelensky, all the efforts aimed at ensuring the return of all forcibly displaced people, particularly children, back to Ukraine, to your country. We are aware of your contribution, Madam Zelenska, to these efforts, as well as of your other remarkable work to alleviate the sufferings of the Ukrainian civilians and to raise awareness of the international community of their so difficult situation. We are more than interested to hear from you today, Madam Zelenska, how we here, as the Council of Europe, can further assist in ensuring that all displaced civilians return home and all children are reunited with their parents in Ukraine. Again, Madam Zelenska, thank you very much for being with us today. May I give you the floor, but may I please first ask to show our gratefulness for being with us today by giving you a grand applause.
Thank you. I will speak Ukrainian.
You have the floor.
Okay, I've heard. I will speak Ukrainian, so please turn on your phones. Доброго дня. Вітаю всіх учасників. Вдячна за вашу увагу до теми примусової депортації українських дітей. Ця тема дуже болить Україні. Тому я дякую за те, що долучилися до боротьби за наших дітей та їхнє дитинство. У нас кажуть, чужих дітей не буває. І ви зараз доводите це тим, що тут. Тому я вам дякую. У розв'язаній Росією проти України війні багато страшних військових злочинів, але цей особливий. Бо стосується тих, хто завжди найбільш незахищений, хто найбільш вразливий. І цей злочин триває прямо зараз, прямо в цей момент, коли ми говоримо. Я маю навести кілька історій. 12-річний Сашко був із мамою Сніжаною в Маріуполі, коли місто оточили російські військові. Разом вони пережили страшні обстріли, відсутність води, тепла, голод, поранення Сашка, поки їх не розділили росіяни. І їм не дали навіть попрощатися. Хлопці сказали, що мама відмовилася від нього. Росіяни говорили, що я мамі не потрібен, що віддадуть прийомну сім'ю в Росії. Це цитата хлопчика. Сашко зміг знайти телефон, щоб зателефонувати бабусі. І його вдалося врятувати, але мама ще у полоні російських окупантів. Інша історія. 12-річна дівчинка Кіра також була з татом в Маріуполі, коли росіяни почали нищити місто. Тато, колишній капітан збірної України з водного полу Євген Обідінський, загинув під час бомбардування. Дівчинку окупанти вивезли до Донецька. Величезними зусиллями держави, громадських діячів, десятків людей, бабуся і дідусь змогли обійняти онуку через місяці полону та невизначеності. Ще одна родина. Тато Євген, син Матвій, маленькі доньки Святослава та Олександра, також із Маріуполя. Після нищення міста окупанти почали процес так званої фільтрації мешканців, які вижили. Тата кинули до тюрми, а дітей забрали до притулку. Кілька місяців вони нічого не знали одне про одного. Діти знайшлися в пансіонаті під Москвою буквально за день до того, як їх мали всиновити росіяни. За цими історіями видно цю страшну технологію, як саме окупанти викрадають українських дітей. Найчастіше вбивши їхніх батьків або примусово розлучивши їх із родинами. А ще вивозять цілі дитбудинки та інтернати. Так трапилося, наприклад, на Херсонщині. Хлопчик Артем разом з іншими вихованцями Олешківського дитячого будинку-інтернату був депортований до РФ. Бабуся та українські посадовці знайшли його вже в Росії. Це історії, які, на щастя, мають хороше закінчення, коли дітей вдалося повернути. Таких історій у нас наразі 361. Але є більш вражаюча цифра. 19 390. Кількість дітей, які досі в російському полоні. І це лише дані, які підтверджені. Але і ця кількість не остаточна, бо те, що відбувається з дітьми на окупованих територіях, невідомо. За кожною цифрою зламане життя не тільки дитини, а й всієї родини. Всіх, хто місяцями не має спокою. Недаремно я акцентувала на початку, що це насильство. Насильство, яке триває прямо зараз. Бо прямо зараз якійсь дитині, так само як Сашку, брешуть, що вона не потрібна, що від неї відмовились. Якась дитина, як Кіра, плаче за вбитими на її очах батьками. Якихось дітей, як Матвія та його сестер, готують до примусового всиновлення. Прямо зараз вони не мають зв'язку з близькими. Ось чому ми критично не маємо часу. Кожен день, кожна година в полоні ламає психіку дітей і родин, коштує здоров'я і життя. Тому нам потрібне не тільки занепокоєння світу, нам потрібна вся можлива дієва допомога з їхнього визволення. Потрібен не тільки порятунок, але й справедливість. Гаазький суд назвав 2 підозрюваних у депортації, але насправді їх 1000. Бо це не випадковий злочин окремого злочинця, це ціла політика і цілий свідомий механізм дії із відчудження дітей, позбавлення їх родин, імен, пам'яті, мови, коріння. Юристи ще скажуть тут докладніше про те, чому це є геноцид. Я ж хочу сказати як людина, як мати 2 дітей. Виховуючи дітей, ми всі хочемо для них кращого життя. Ми розказуємо дітям про добро та зло, про хороше та погане. І ось це зло, воно матеріальне, воно так виглядає. Не в метафорах, а в реальності. Ми, дорослі, так багато кажемо дітям про перемогу добра, правильних вчинків. І от зараз саме маємо це довести. Маємо врятувати дітей фізично і морально, якщо ми дійсно дорослі і відповідальні, якщо відрізняємо добро та зло. У прав людини немає кордонів. І коли дитинство в одній країні під загрозою, воно під загрозою повсюдно. Небезпека для українських дітей – це небезпека для інших дітей світу. Викрадення дітей, катування батьків Це зазіхання не тільки на нас, зазіхання на все міжнародне право, на принципі співіснування. Це виклик всім. Я прошу поставитися до цього саме як до виклику всім нашим спільним цінностям, нашій уяві про добро та зло. Це той випадок, коли порятунок можливий лише всім світом. Давайте станемо таким світом для наших дітей, щоб вони знову повірили в цей світ та його людей. Після всього пережитого теж відновили свою довіру. Дякую.
Thank you very much, Madam Zelenska, for informing us and giving us the faces which are behind or in front of the figures that you mentioned as well. That we understand that behind every figure there is a full universe, and that this assembly, I very much agree with you, has a high responsibility to do whatever we can do in order to assure that this fundamental human right of children to be with their parents is restored. Thank you once again for giving us this up-to-date information. Now, first in the debate, I call Madam Zanda Kalnina Lukashevich from Latvia, and she speaks on behalf of the European People's Party. Zanda, you have the floor.
Thank you. Dear colleagues, dear First Lady of the Ukraine, first let me thank also the rapporteur, Mr. Paulo Pisco, and the Committee on Migration for a very good draft of the resolution. I have to be frank. The use of the Ukrainian children in an attempt to attack the resolve and determination of brave people of Ukraine is the utmost inhuman action besides all the war crimes committed by Russia. I mean, the killings, sexual abuse, injuries of the children, the unlawful transfers and deportation to the Russian Federation and Belarus, and children forcible placement under custody or adoption by Russian foster families. The so-called re-education summer camps organized by Russia are nothing else but propaganda and torture camps, both for the children who are under strict regime in the so-called camps, and as well for parents or relatives who in many cases don't even know where their children are. This practice is a clear combination of hostage-taking, deportation and Russification policy, with prohibition to speak Ukrainian language or express in many ways or in any ways their Ukrainian identity and culture. This is crime of genocide under the Genocide Convention. Dear colleagues, last week I had an opportunity to meet with the father of 3 deported children from Mariupol and the incredibly brave and bright kids. The family also just mentioned by the First Lady. The 3 children were deported to Moscow and were obliged to experience the so-called Russian care of the Ukrainian children. They literally went through hell. While the father was detained for almost 2 months, the children were told that their father could be dead. If not dead, then in jail for a long time, and he won't come after them ever. At the Russian presidential camp, children's day started at 6 a.m. Almost every day, they had a demonstration of Russian propaganda movies and movies about the Second World War. Some days, they were pushed to attend dance parties, discos with loud blasting music. Can you imagine this combination? The children have just experienced the horror of war, in this case in Mariupol, and believe they have just lost their only parent, are forced to go to dance party and watch war movies. Only a miracle helped the family from Mariupol to find a way to reunite. This family have found safe haven in Riga, Latvia. However, there are so many families from Ukraine to be united. Ladies and gentlemen, let me once more welcome the decision of the ICC to issue arrest warrants for the President of the Russian Federation and the Commissioner for Children's Rights in the Office of the President of the Russian Federation. They are directly responsible for the Ukrainian children's deportations. I would like to express strong support to the recommendations put forward by the Commissioner for Human Rights of the Council of Europe, calling for urgent establishment of concrete mechanisms and solutions to reunite the children with their families. Likewise, I would like to express support for the active role to be played by this organization in determining accountability and securing justice. To conclude, ladies and gentlemen, this is our duty and responsibility to punish the perpetrators and help Ukrainian children. We have to find ways how to save Ukrainian children from the hell called Russian care, urgently.
Thank you, Zanda. Next in the debate, I call Madam Yevgenia Kravchuk from Ukraine. Yevgenia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dear colleagues, share colleague, rapporteur. I want to start with some personal observation from my family. My husband is a policeman, and when there is a special code concerning children, the crime against children, all the crimes receive so-called alpha status. It's no matter it's day or night, middle of winter, actually, especially if it's night and middle of winter, the special rescue team is gathered immediately and no one rests until the child, which is abducted, for example, gets home. And, I even can tell it from the phone when he speaks because he says, gather everyone. Ukraine cannot gather a rescue team to go physically to Russia and bring Ukrainian kids back. But what we can form the coalition of like-minded countries, of like-minded people who share the same values, because these values are universal, to put pressure on this world criminal Putin, whose arrest warrant waits for him in The Hague. We also should use all the legal and all international instruments to bring Ukrainian kids home and their perpetrators to court and justice. The scariest thing right now, which is probably, Russia is doing with abducted children, that they are being re-educated, cut off from contact with their homeland, poisoned with the worst messages of the psychological techniques of Russian propaganda. In fact, they're being sent to a factory to produce a new person, a person loyal to the Russian world and also ready to aggressively impose it by force in future. This is exactly what Hitler and Stalin did in the last century. What are the Russians really doing by re-educating Ukrainian children? They're not just depriving the national identity, forcing them to hate the land they were born in. They are violating and destroying the children's inner world. To destroy at least one child's inner world is a crime against future. But in the center of Europe, we have a machine, a state machine that kidnaps a child, destroys the identity, and that's the challenge for Europe and for the entire civilized world, a challenge of barbarism and genocide. Yes, genocide. And as our rapporteur has rightfully mentioned, that the forcible transfer of children from one group to another group with the intention to destroy, totally or in part, a national, ethnic, racial or religious group is considered as a crime of genocide under Article 2, paragraph E of the 1948 Genocide Conventions. And it matches with the documented evidence of deportation and forcible transfer of Ukrainian children to Russian Federation. It's important that we call in this report to international Criminal Court to consider prosecuting Russia for committing genocide against Ukrainians. And it's important that we urge the state parties of the Rome Statute to take all measures to bring Putin and Lvova Belova to The Hague where they belong. And on behalf of the ALDE group, I urge you to support this resolution, and I urge to combine our efforts to bring all Ukrainian children back home and their perpetrators to The Hague.
Thank you very much. Evgenia, and you mentioned what I forgot and need to say, that you spoke on behalf of the ALDE group. Now, on behalf of the European Conservative group, we are going to listen to Madam Olena Komenko, also from Ukraine. Olena?
Dear colleagues, the crime of deportation is a typical tool of Russia throughout the centuries. The Russian Empire, the USSR, or the modern Russian Federation, this country has always aimed to destroy national communities. Nowadays, with its mass-scale campaign of stealing Ukrainian children, Russia goes for its ultimate mission of destroying the Ukrainian nation to steal new Ukrainian generations. Russian authorities have interrogated, detained, and forcibly deported hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian children from their homes within Ukraine to Russia. This has included the deliberate separation of children from their parents and the abduction of children from orphanages before placing these children for adoption in Russia. Russia applies pressure on children while they stay here, prohibiting to express their Ukrainian identity, bullying them, lying, and isolating them from any communications, and on parents even when they personally come to save their children. Finding them and bringing them home is our top priority, and Ukraine counts on you in this effort too. Every operation of bringing children back is unique, complicated, and often involves risks to the relatives going into Russian territory and requires substantial resources. For instance, during one of the latest missions, there was a failed attempt to return 2 children due to the sudden death of their grandmother. Imagine the stress she experienced to rescue her precious children. It is a story of Ilya from Mariupol when he and his mother came under shelling, when they were running to the apartment of their acquaintances, to a house that was more suitable for living at the time. The boy was injured in the leg, and his mother suffered a severe head injury. She gathered her last maternal strength and dragged her 11-year-old son to the apartment, where she later died in his arms. Then Russians took the boy from the friends of his family and took him to the occupied Donbass. We managed to return him and reunite him with his grandmother. There is also a risk that Ukrainian children could be eventually adopted by families from other countries. And we urge Council of Europe states to coordinate efforts with Ukraine to prevent this course of actions. Ukraine cannot and will not leave any child behind. Is this assembly finally growing a backbone? Do we finally have enough resolve to ensure the protection of children's rights in accordance with the law that embodies our humanity? Or does it just stay, as so often, words, meaningless words? I'm begging you, for the sake of our children and the survival of the Ukrainian nation, please help financing and directing the governmental and non-governmental organizations supporting families in uniting them. Please help Ukraine to apply pressure to bring back all the actual so-called orphans held captive in Russia. Prosecute with us those committing the systematic violation of the international law. This is the way to ensure a just and peaceful future for all the victims of Russian crimes, and we all have a role to play in it. So let's act together, and let's act now. Thank you, dear colleagues.
Thank you, Olena. Next in the debate, I call Mr. Bjarni Jonsson from Iceland, and Bjarni speaks on behalf of the Unified European Left.
Mr. President, Mrs. Zelenska, First Lady of Ukraine. This debate is of utmost concern the illegal deportation of Ukrainian children to Russia. Since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, evidence has been collected about core international crimes committed against Ukrainian children, and it is important to take note that the forcible transfer and deportation of civilians, including children, can be prosecuted as a war crime and as a crime against humanity. This practice not only violates international law, but it also goes against the principles of human rights and the best interest of the child. We must find out about the whereabouts of these children, even though the Russian regime will not cooperate. We must do our utmost to get the abducted Ukrainian children reunited with their families and relatives. A thorough documentation of this brutal act is important for the children at stake and their families. But it is also vital for the accountability of the Russian regime for crimes against Ukrainian people. As stated in the report, the Council of Europe member states should continue to assist Ukraine and others, including through any future register of damage, to record cases, gather evidence, identify victims and their current locations, and establish communications with them. Continued support for Ukraine, accountability of the aggressor, and the establishment of a register of damages, the first legally binding act of this nature, will be at the heart of the Reykjavik summit. The establishment of the registry is extraordinary and the first necessary step of comprehensive mechanism for the victims of war, of aggression, including the children that have been robbed of their future. This vital first step will create the necessary legal foundations for acting on crimes committed in due time. The situation of the children affected by war, including the Ukrainian children that have been forcibly separated from their families, will be on the agenda at the Reykjavik summit. Furthermore, the Committee of Ministers is working on a text to support the children of Ukraine, and I hope for an agreement by Council of Europe in this area. I also have to say that new study shows large majority of allied citizens among member states of NATO support the country continuing to provide support to Ukraine. And I am proud to say the citizens of Iceland are the ones that express the strongest support. The international community universally sees the abduction of children as unacceptable. Removing children from their families or from care facilities and forcibly transferring them is by all considered a reprehensible act of violence. The forced removal of children from their homes and families is a traumatic experience that can have lasting negative effects on their mental and emotional well-being. We must do everything in our power to reclaim the life of these children and their families and to make the Russian regime answer to these cruel acts of war crimes. Children that are being torn from their families and stripped of their identity and future, deprived of their loved ones, heritage and culture, we must unite to bring them back, and we will.
Thank you, Bjarni. Last speaker on behalf of the political groups is Madam Thorhildur Sunna Ivarsdottir. Sunna, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you, Madam Zelenska, for being with us today and for your powerful plea for justice for the children of Ukraine. Stealing children, robbing them of their families and their identity is not only an atrocity towards them, it is not only a horrible crime against these children and their families, but it is rightly defined as a component of the crime of all crimes, the crime of genocide. The mounting evidence of the systemic and intentional nature of these crimes puts a grave responsibility on all of us in our national capacities, but also in particular upon our international legal and humanitarian organizations to respond rapidly and effectively on multiple fronts. First, we must act fast to trace all of these children and return them to their families, or if that's not possible, to another safe haven. Here, our international institutions, and in particular the leaders of this institution, must do their very best to establish a mechanism capable of this enormous task as quickly as possible. I hope that we will be able to take meaningful steps in this direction in my home country in just a few weeks. Secondly, we must face the facts. The facts that these systemic abductions of Ukrainian children reveal the genocidal intent of the Russian authorities towards the Ukrainian nation and accept our responsibility to bring the perpetrators of these grave crimes to justice. And finally, we must do everything in our power to support our Ukrainian friends, and we must do everything in our power to fulfill our duty to prevent genocide, which is an international and a moral duty that lies on all of us. And we should not forget history, and we should learn from the mistakes of history, and we should do everything we can with all the means at our disposal to stop these grave crimes against the people of Ukraine and against the children of Ukraine as quickly as humanly possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Suna. Now in the debate, I call Mr. Lukas Savikas from Lithuania. Lukas, you have the floor.
Thank you, dear President, dear honorable guests. I want to thank the rapporteur for brilliant work done. And we all know that today we are all witnesses of a painful history repeating. Deportations of innocent people from countries occupied by Russia 70 years ago are happening once again in Ukraine. There are numerous credible sources, including International Criminal Court, the International Commission Inquiry on Ukraine, who have called attention to Russia's unlawful forced deportations of children from within Ukraine to the Russian Federation. As of mid-April 2023, the Ukrainian government stated that it had collected reports of over 19,000 children classified as deported to the Russian Federation, of which the authorities have indicated only 361 having since returned. This has included deliberate separation of children from their parents, and abduction of children from orphanages, and placing these children for adoption within Russia. It clearly violates international humanitarian law, as well as amounts to a war crime. Furthermore, the practice of these unlawful deportations had started before the Russian Federation full-scale aggression against Ukraine of 24 February 2022. These practices have intensified and evolved further since that date and are clearly being planned and organized in a systematic way within the framework of state policy. Policy which is based on Russification process, which implies a prohibition to the deported children to speak Ukrainian language or express in any way their Ukrainian identity or culture. The President of Russian Federation and President's Commissioner for Children's Rights have both been indicted by International Criminal Court. The victims and survivors of war aggression and atrocity crimes have a right to justice and a right to reparations. Therefore, we must support all accountability efforts. However, the repatriation of children, their rehabilitation, the creation of conditions for family reunifications to preserve and to identify the children of Ukraine must now be a priority for all Council of Europe member states. I really hope that we will show our solidarity today and pass this resolution unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucas. Now I call Madam Lysia Vasilenko from Ukraine. Lysia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, dear colleagues. And today I am very, very grateful to our rapporteurs who have put together a fundamental report which condemns in the strictest but also in the fairest terms the grave crime, another grave crime that Russia is committing against the peaceful people of Ukraine and against the most vulnerable of those peaceful people. This time last year, speaking at the UN Security Council, Amal Clooney called Ukraine a slaughterhouse. Ukraine became a slaughterhouse at the courtesy of Russia. And to save the children from this slaughterhouse, many Ukrainian parents have had, sometimes at gunpoint, to make the difficult choice of moving their children to safety to Russia. Now, the First Lady of Ukraine has given you a few examples of the cases at hand. And I would like you to imagine just now, as parents, what it is like when you stay for a month, maybe more, in the basement with your child, struggling to find food, struggling to survive yourself and to have your child survive, and then one day soldiers come, men in uniform, with their tanks and their guns, and they tell you to get out and to cross over the border, to cross into Russia. And worse still, sometimes they tell you to hand over your child, and promising that that child will be taken to safety. It's a choice without a choice, really. And that choice without a choice has led to 20,000 children, Ukrainian children, being essentially abducted by Russia. These 20,000 are just the cases that we know of, that we have identified. There are 100,000 more, maybe as many as 1 million. But we cannot say for sure, because Russia does not allow to monitor and to investigate the situation. Instead, what we know is that Russia has espoused, yet again, the colonialistic strategy of the USSR empire, where the youth of Ukraine are being robbed of their national identity. The children that we have managed to save all report being forced to sing the Russian national anthem, being forced to learn the propaganda from Russian history books. They are made feel ashamed of being Ukrainian, and they are made feel fear of being Ukrainian. And this shame and this fear, it stays for lifetimes, it stays for generations, and it paves the way to the eradication of a nation. And Russia is doing exactly that. Article 2 of the International Convention on the Prevention of the Crime of Genocide, point E, says exactly that. And Article 1 of that very same convention puts a responsibility on the states signatories of the convention, of which all of our member states of this organization are part of, to prevent the crime of genocide. I hope today that there will be a unanimous support for this report, for this resolution, but I also hope even more that we all go back home set to make sure to close this very sad genocidal page in the history of Ukraine, but also in our common European history, and to make sure that this page is closed once and for all and as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Lesha. Now in the debate, I give the floor to Mr. Alexander Meresko from Ukraine. Alexander?
Thank you. Dear friends, we all know that deportation of children is one of the most serious international crimes which constitutes genocide under the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. It is not only our moral, but also our legal duty, obligation under international law to prevent a crime of genocide and to punish the perpetrators of this horrible crime, no matter where it happens, in Ukraine, in Burma, in Chechnya, in Rwanda, in Tibet, in Xinjiang, or in any other part of the world. I would like to emphasize the idea that under international law, a crime of genocide is a crime against the whole international community, against the whole humankind, against each human being. We should do everything possible to prevent genocide, to stop genocide, and to bring to justice the perpetrators. To ignore unfolding genocide, to stay neutral, is deeply immoral and amounts to being on the side of the evil. The perpetrators of the genocide want us to pretend that we don't see what's going on, thereby making us silent accomplices of these crimes. One of the lessons of the Second World War is that humankind should make every effort to stop genocide. Unfortunately, we continue to live in times when the genocidal authoritarian regimes, one of such regimes is the terrorist state Russia, conduct genocidal policy. In terms of their methods and propaganda, all genocidal regimes are alike. To cover up such genocide, the authoritarian regimes use different euphemisms, and one of them is re-education, which in reality means stealing the children from their parents and brainwashing them by propaganda, be it a Russian totalitarian propaganda or any kind of communist propaganda with national specifics. In the face of the crime of genocide committed by authoritarian regimes, the humankind should have very clear and effective response. In other words, the crucial question is what we all together should do to stop the unfolding genocides. I am confident that a genocidal state should be totally isolated politically, economically, diplomatically. In particular, a genocide regime cannot be a member of the United Nations or a permanent member of the Security Council. And I would like to suggest that we start fighting genocidal regimes by severing diplomatic relations with the genocidal states. As we can see, the existing political and legal mechanisms of the genocide prevention don't function properly. That is why we need to create a new legal and political mechanisms which would be sufficiently effective and which would protect victims of genocide. I also believe that the Council of Europe can and should play an important role in this regard. If we don't do anything, if the free world will continue to ignore genocide or not doing enough, no matter where it is being committed, then at some point in time, genocide can come to our homes. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexander. Now I give the floor to your neighbor, Maria Mazensva, Madam Maria Mazensva from Ukraine. Maria, you have the floor now.
Dank u wel. Thank you, dear President. Hello, colleagues. You know, we are setting up yet another historical example for the international organizations, because everything we're passing here in terms of resolutions are going further to the UN institutions, to the NATO, OSCE parliamentary assemblies, and today is yet another historical document which is at your tables. We are confirming that what has happened and what is being happening as of now in Ukraine, in the temporary occupied territories of Ukraine, in the Russian Federation, in Belarus, in Chechnya, in sometimes there are cases already being evident that kids are being deported, Ukrainian kids are being deported to Syria even. They are here, very well said by the rapporteur, by the Migration Committee, and hopefully voted by us as a crime of a genocide. There were 361 cases, as the First Lady said, the tears of happiness for the 361 families. But there are so many more tears of sorrow, which will follow and drop further and further again. Colleagues, we have already the ICC warrant for President Putin, the empire of evil, and his so-called lady for the rights of children, Madam Lvova Belova. We hope that the justice will prevail, but what does this paper give to us as parliamentarians? What does this paper give to us, to the families who are suffering? We clearly state, we call on the International Red Cross to use its clear mandate to travel, to get the security clearance to more than 40 camps of detention of these children in the territory of Russia. We call on the United Nations, we call on the UNESCO, whom we met, the representatives of whom we've met today, and they are ready to help, because these children cannot walk with their small legs to the office in Moscow. They do not know how can they report this crime, because most of them probably have lost their relatives, don't have a contact with their relatives, and they're being lied that their relatives are simply dead, which is not true. Surely the Lanzarote Convention, Russia stays as a side party to this international document, because many of these children are probably, as of now, might be misused for sexual exploitations, for the trade of children, etc. Colleagues, we have an important amendment at the very end of this paper suggesting the strengthening of the Coordination Council for the Protection of Children under the office of President Zelensky. And I highly ask you to support all of the amendments that will be presented. No 3 minutes, no 5 minutes, not hour, not 11 hours of discussion would tell us how we really feel, how these families really feel. But this brings us, this paper brings us closer as a chairmanship and championship of our organization to really bring every Ukrainian child back home. Please support this resolution. Slava героям, діткам України.
Thank you very much. Dear Maria, next in the debate I call Mr. Mehmet Mehdi Eka from Turkey.
Dear President, dear colleagues, I thank the rapporteur for his work that addresses the situation of the forcibly displaced Ukrainian civilians and children. I regret that civilians, especially children, are always the most vulnerable group that are most adversely affected by the conflicts and subsequent atrocities. The war in Ukraine has claimed lives of thousands of civilians, including children. Moreover, millions were forced from their homes and became refugees or stranded in areas affected by the conflict. Accountability is also vital to deter and prevent violations of international humanitarian law, as well as international human rights law. We call for fair, prompt, and impartial investigations on all allegations of violations and to hold perpetrators accountable in a competent court of law. To alleviate the sufferings of civilians and to provide humanitarian relief, safety and freedom of movement of the UN and other international organizations must be guaranteed. Prohibition of torture and ill treatment is imperative, especially in times of armed conflicts. Its prevention starts with ensuring the access of independent observers. Since the beginning of the war, Turkey has engaged in facilitating progress on the humanitarian and practical aspects of the war. Black Sea Grain Initiative, led by Turkey and United Nations joint efforts, large-scale prisoner exchange, including commanders of the Azov Battalion, and our proposal to set up a deconfliction zone around Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant are instances where Turkey acted as a facilitator. We also hosted Russian and Ukrainian ombudspersons in January in Ankara. They discussed a number of humanitarian issues, including return of children and family reunification. In the period ahead, Turkey will continue its efforts in this regard. We will also continue to support this Assembly's efforts to lessen the suffering of those affected by the war. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mehmet. Next in the debate, I call Madam Sandra Zampa from Italy. Sandra, you have the floor.
Grazie Presidente. Ringrazio il collega Pisco per il difficile e delicatissimo lavoro finalizzato a denunciare e a colpire anche in questa sede così autorevole il fenomeno delle deportazioni e dei trasferimenti forzati di persone di minore età, bambine e bambini ucraini, verso la Federazione Russa o i territori ucraini temporaneamente occupati. Il 17 marzo scorso la seconda Camera pre-dibattimentale della Corte Penale Internazionale ha emesso 2 mandati di arresto per il presidente russo Putin e per la commissaria per i diritti dei bambini, sembra quasi una beffa questo nome, Lova Belova. In quella sede sono stati evidenziati ragionevoli motivi per ritenere entrambi responsabili del crimine di guerra di deportazione illegale dei bambini ucraini. Si tratta di gravissime violazioni della Convenzione di Ginevra sulla tutela della popolazione civile e delle norme nel quadro consolidato del diritto internazionale sui conflitti. Anche la Commissione internazionale indipendente d'inchiesta delle Nazioni Unite nel suo rapporto di marzo ha denunciato il fenomeno e il Consiglio per i diritti umani delle Nazioni Unite ha approvato una risoluzione sul tema, così come ha fatto il Parlamento europeo. Da ultimo, la commissaria per i diritti umani del Consiglio d'Europa, Mijatović, ha denunciato, al termine di una visita finalizzata precisamente a far luce sul fenomeno, la violazione della Convenzione ONU sui diritti del fanciullo, sottoscritta anche dalla Federazione Russa, Da sempre le guerre hanno nelle persone più vulnerabili, bambini in testa, le vittime prioritarie. Un crimine ignobile che deve essere impedito. Anche per questo occorre intensificare le attività diplomatiche e politiche, lavorando tutti insieme per ottenere la restituzione dei bambini alle loro famiglie e al loro paese. Occorre che tutta la comunità internazionale si mobiliti e che siano sostenute le agenzie umanitarie e le organizzazioni non governative che tutelano l'infanzia e i diritti umani. L'Italia sosterrà ogni azione finalizzata a questo fine, perché cessi questo spaventoso crimine e ai bambini siano restituiti i diritti che la Convenzione ONU indica saggiamente.
Grazie mille, Sandra. Next in the debate, I call Madam Maria Valentina Martinez Ferro from Spain. Maria, you have the floor. It looks as if Maria is not with us, so next I give the floor to Madam Olena Zelenska from Ukraine. Olena, you have the floor.
I would like to thank the reporters for supporting us. Thanks to First Lady of Ukraine, Olena Zelenska, for this speech. Right now, my child, a 9-month-old boy, Bogdan, is here, having traveled more than 2,000 kilometers to be with me. Unfortunately, not all Ukrainian children have the opportunity to be with their families right now. Today, the world's largest country in terms of territory, Russian Federation, is forcibly removing other people's children. At the same time, the Russian authorities note both an increase in child crime in their country and in the number of suicides among Russian children. They can't manage their own children, but they steal ours. We hope that more than 1,000 pages of materials on the forced deportation of children submitted by the Office of the Prosecutor General to the ICC will be used to punish the criminals. The number of Ukrainian citizens forcibly deported to Russia last year is more than 2.5 million. More than 90,000 deported Ukrainian children have been officially verified. In fact, the figure may be more than 15 times higher. The practice of illegal and forced deportation of children from Ukraine to Russia is a violation of international law. We are grateful to the international partners for providing financial support to the ICC to strengthen its capacity to investigate these crimes and for imposing sanctions on 15 individuals responsible to the deportation and forced adoption of Ukrainian children from the occupied territories. We also have great hopes for the Reykjavik summit and for the conference organized by European Commission and Poland, which is designed to unite international efforts to find children deported from Ukraine. Children are not weapons. Children are not a method of warfare and political games. Children should be resting in summer camps, not being tortured in filtration once. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for your contribution, Olena. Next speaker will be Mr. Alexei Goncharenko from Ukraine. Alexei.
Thank you very much, dear Chairman, dear colleagues. First of all, great work of rapporteur. Big thanks for this, and especially big thanks for the word genocide, which is mentioned in the text. That is very important. But we need to say after this, when we are saying terrorism, we know that there is a definition, sponsor of terrorism. But when we are saying genocide, there are also sponsors of genocide. So who are the sponsors of genocide? And I want now to mention one country, Hungary. Just last year, Hungary tripled their import from Russia. It means that average Hungarian every month is sending 18 euros to Russia to finance this war, to finance this genocide. Starting from a newborn, every month. And it's extremely painful for me, because Hungary is our neighbor. I can understand when some people in Brazil, maybe they don't realize who are the Russians, what they're doing. Maybe for them Russia is matryoshka and ballet in Bolshoi theater. But people from Hungary, they know what is Russia. Because not like Russians never raped women in Rio de Janeiro, but Russian tankists killed people in Budapest in 1956. Russian people and Russian army killed people in Hungary in 1848. For several times already in Hungarian history, their liberty, their future was taken by Russia and destroyed. And after this, we see all these statements, oh no, we will not say, that is some war, that is not about us, we need cheap Russian gas. So, dear Hungarians, you are exchanging cheap Russian gas on our children. Are you serious about this? I'm shocked because I understand when Budapest was occupied by Russian tanks, that was clear. But it looks like that today, Hungary is occupied by cheap Russian gas. Is it real liberty if your decisions are dictated by just the price of gas? I can understand why people can be afraid of tank. I saw it by my own eyes, as millions of Ukrainians. But I can't understand how people can be terrified and their way of life can be dictated by price on gas. That's something which should not happen, according to Christian traditions about which Prime Minister Orban is saying all the time. How Minister of Foreign Affairs Siarta can come to Moscow when already International Criminal Court issued a warrant on Putin? How it can be? Just can somebody explain it to me? So I address to Hungarians, it's never late to fix the mistakes. Please do it. Fix the mistakes, stand with the free world, stand with Ukraine, stand with your neighbor, let us protect the freedom, democracy. That is the best pragmatic option for Hungary too. And together we will win. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alexei. I heard that it is your opinion about Ukraine, but to say that a member state is a sponsor of genocide, that is your opinion, you're entitled to, but we should take care by using words here in this assembly. Having said that, maintenant, le prochain orateur est M. Didier de Marie de la France. Vous avez la parole, Didier.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, mes chers collègues. Je remercie à mon tour notre collègue Paulo Pisco pour son rapport et Madame Zelenska pour son émouvante intervention qui souligne l'ampleur des déportations et transferts forcés d'enfants ukrainiens vers la Fédération de Russie ou les territoires ukrainiens temporairement occupés. C'est un sujet sur lequel le Sénat français a pris récemment position en adoptant une résolution condamnant les agissements de la Russie. Et je suis heureux que notre Assemblée adopte à son tour une position forte tant le sujet est grave. De nombreux chiffres ont circulé et le rapport qui nous est soumis retient l'hypothèse de plus de 19 000 enfants déportés. Ils sont vraisemblablement plus nombreux. Comme le souligne notre rapporteur, ces déportations relèvent d'une politique d'État systématique. C'est l'avenir de l'Ukraine que la Russie tente d'affaiblir en la privant de futures forces vives. C'est la culture ukrainienne qu'elle veut atteindre. Mais c'est aussi une Russie en proie à de graves problèmes démographiques qui veut se renforcer. De nombreux enfants déportés sont placés dans des familles d'accueil ou hébergés dans des camps où ils suivent un processus de russification accéléré pour tenter de les couper durablement de leur pays, de leurs origines. Il ne s'agit pas d'un déplacement humanitaire pour préserver la vie d'enfants confrontés à la guerre. Il s'agit bien d'un crime de guerre, d'un crime contre l'humanité, d'un crime de génocide au regard de la Convention de 1948. Face à cette situation, notre réaction doit être claire et unanime. Et j'invite tous nos parlements à adopter des résolutions condamnant ces crimes et appelant la Russie à cesser immédiatement ceci et à restituer ces enfants à leurs parents et à leur pays. Je me félicite que la Cour pénale internationale ait émis des mandats d'arrêt contre M. Poutine et Mme Vlova-Belova. Au-delà, ce sont tous les responsables des déportations d'enfants ukrainiens qui doivent être poursuivis. Tous les États partis au statut de Rome doivent assurer l'exécution de ces mandats d'arrêt. et faire en sorte que tous les responsables des déportations d'enfants ukrainiens soient poursuivis. J'appelle les États membres du Conseil de l'Europe à mettre en œuvre tous les moyens à leur disposition, en coopération avec les autorités ukrainiennes, pour identifier, documenter et recenser tous les cas de transferts forcés et de déportation d'enfants engagés par la Russie depuis le début du conflit. La création d'un registre des dommages serait une contribution importante du Conseil de l'Europe et je forme le vœu qu'il soit établi rapidement. Notre engagement doit être sans faille et une perspective doit nous guider, celle du rapatriement des enfants déportés afin qu'ils puissent demain vivre dans leur pays, retrouver leurs parents et vivre dans ce qui est et restera l'Ukraine. Merci.
Merci à vous, Didier. Now I call on the debate Mr. Jacek Protasevich from Poland. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President, colleagues, members of the Council of Europe. First of all, allow me to start with expressing my sincere gratitude to Madame Zelenska, First Lady of Ukraine, for her moving speech delivered to our chamber a while ago. Real examples of children being victims of Russian invaders who were present during her speech have been, I believe, for all of us gathered here in the hemicycle, very touching. Secondly, let me also thank to Paulo Pisco, the author of the draft report on deportations and forcible transfer of Ukrainian children and other civilians to Russian Federation or to Ukrainian territories temporarily occupied, create conditions for the safe return, stop these crimes and punish the perpetrators. I do agree, Paulo, with you and with your opening statement of that report. Aggression against Ukraine of February 24th last year represents a massive and ongoing violation of international law and a tragedy of human suffering. One of the most shameful examples of Russia's crime against humanity is simply kidnapping Ukrainian children from elder ages until the age of 17 years old and transferring them to Russian families, orphanages or youth camps located in territories controlled by Russian Federation. The cynical goal of those illegal practices is to impose an indoctrination on them in order to bring up new Russian citizens full of a hatred to their homeland or even parents, as they are very often told to be abandoned and forgotten by them. Those crimes were already firmly condemned by both the United Nations and our Council, the European Parliament, as well as Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, as violations of different conventions, and particularly the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, once signed by Russia Federation itself. As those practices are organized and carried out in a systematic way, with at least 20,000 children deported to Russia, we observe, in fact, a state-designed policy of kidnapping children, and that is why the Russian government must be perceived as a terrorist one. And members of the regime, including Maria Alexeyevna Lvova-Bielova, Russian Commissioner for Children's Rights in the Office of the President of the Russian Federation, along with Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin, should be brought to the International Criminal Court that already issued a proper arrest warrant against them. And finally, following the request of Maria Mentzleva, I would like to declare my support for amendments submitted by Ukrainian delegation to this draft report, because, for instance, by mentioning Alexander Lukashenko, those amendments include also other people involved in that criminal activity. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we are going to listen to Mr. Kimmo Kiljunen from Finland. Kimmo?
Mr. President, I see the time constraints, and I try to be very short, knowing that the speakers list is still very long. As Mr. President, you know very well, when we are discussing countries like Belarus and countries like Russia, we are frequently saying that the place for politicians is in parliament, not in exile or in prison. That's the basics in any democratic society in politics. Mr. President, you know similarly well that the place for a child is in home, in secure family environment, not in some alien environment, alien families, alien countries. That's the basics of human life. Who breaks that one breaks some very, very essential in human dignity. Thank you.
Thank you, Kimmo. Now we are going to listen to Mr. Emanuel Singers from Lithuania. Emanuel, you have the floor.
Thank you. Dear colleagues, just the President, Lady number one, mentioned 19,390 kidnapped children, only 361 returned to Ukraine. Means 20,000 Ukrainian children there in the hands of ideology who is producing hatred. Hatred inside of Russia in preparation to the second and third war who will be after Ukrainian war turned against us. Mr. Putin just a few days ago, dear President, announced that new pioneer organizations will be established in Russia with absolutely crystal clear Russian mirror ideology. My mother faced years and years in Nazi concentration camps in Germany after ghetto. And she told me the stories about the guys who were from Hitler Jugend, raising hands for Adolf Hitler. So we are repeating the Hitler Jugend stories with Russian pioneers, overbooked with expansionist Russian ideology, and children, Ukrainian children, who stopped to listen to the lullabies in Ukrainian language and switched not only to Russian language, but the ideology were put it for all Russia territory, including Buryat children, including Chechen children, including Russian children, where you have Maslykova case when for one drawing about freedom of Ukraine, all family were, father was detained and arrested. Mr. Chairman, dear friends, we just spent the story 25 years of Lukashenko regime. What he did with Belarusian children, what he, in closing 200 Belarusian national language schools and turning them to Russian school and turning them to the Ruski Mir ideology. Poland and Lithuania is on the border with Belarus, and we're facing new militarized, in the fascist hatred way, Belarusian generation. Ukraine children should be saved from the two items, A and B, to be kidnapped, having their rights for Ukrainian national identity, and third, to be saved from hatred. Hatred spread by Mr. Putin in every corner of Russia. In front of us, we have all, and especially in this fantastic report, who I am supporting from my deep heart, and amendments, very good amendments. The Lemkin formulation of genocide, 1948, by United Nations. So if Russia withdraw from Council of Europe, but Russia still is a member and now is of United Nations, and this genocide convention was created like an echo to Second World War by Jewish guy, Mr. Lemkin, who family say were surviving Second Holocaust.
Thank you, Emmanuel.
So for that reason, I am asking to support this fantastic report and the amendments. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I want to give as many people the floor as possible if we stick to the speaking time. Prochain orateur est Monsieur Claude Kern de la France. Claude.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Mes chers collègues, je remercie notre collègue Paulo Pisco pour ce rapport qui appelle une réponse claire contre les déportations et transferts forcés d'enfants et d'autres civils ukrainiens vers la Fédération de Russie ou les territoires ukrainiens temporairement occupés.
J'ai moi-même été le rapporteur d'une résolution sur ce sujet adoptée par le Sénat français à l'initiative de notre collègue André Gattolin. Je rappelle que les enfants sont particulièrement protégés par le droit international, qu'il s'agisse du droit de la guerre ou du droit international humanitaire, régi notamment par les conventions de Genève du 12 août 1949, mais aussi bien sûr par la Déclaration universelle des droits de l'homme de 1948 et par la Convention internationale relative aux droits de l'enfant. Tous ces textes ratifiés par la Russie. Ils le sont aussi par les traités et les textes européens. À la différence des combattants qui, une fois capturés, sont détenus comme prisonniers de guerre et peuvent être déplacés vers le territoire ennemi, le transfert forcé de civils et notamment d'enfants est interdit par le droit international humanitaire et peut donner lieu à des poursuites en tant que crime de guerre et crime contre l'humanité. La Cour pénale internationale a émis des mandats d'arrêt contre Vladimir Poutine et contre Maria Lvova-Belova, la commissaire présidentielle russe aux droits de l'enfant. C'est un acte très important, mais il faut maintenant faire en sorte qu'il soit suivi d'effets. Ces deux figures sont évidemment les plus symboliques, mais il faudra s'attaquer à l'ensemble de la chaîne des responsables de la mise en œuvre de cette politique d'État. Maria Lvova-Belova a été sanctionnée par l'Union européenne dans le cadre du 7e train de sanctions adopté en juillet 2022. Je considère que le train de sanctions adopté par l'Union européenne devra être élargi afin de viser l'ensemble des responsables du système de déportation d'enfants et de civils. J'appelle également tous les États membres du Conseil de l'Europe et l'Union européenne à mettre en œuvre tous les moyens techniques et humains à leur disposition en coopération avec les autorités ukrainiennes pour documenter et recenser tous les cas de transfert forcé et de déportation d'enfants. Ce génocide, ces crimes ne doivent pas rester impunis. Mais l'objectif ultime, au-delà du jugement de ces criminels de guerre, c'est bien le retour des enfants déportés en Ukraine afin qu'ils puissent demain y construire leur avenir et participer au développement de leur pays et au rayonnement de la culture dont on essaye de les priver. Ce sera certainement un combat long et difficile, mais notre détermination doit être sans faille. Je vous remercie.
Merci à vous, cher Claude. Now I call in the debate Mr. Paulo Pisco from Ukraine. Pavlo, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President, dear colleagues. The topic we are debating on today terrifies me as a father, as a Ukrainian and a human being. In the middle of Europe, thousands of children are being abducted and forcibly taken away from their parents and their homeland. As per the National Police of Ukraine, around 19,000 children have been illegally deported to Russia. However, due to the imperatory occupation of Ukrainian territories and the lack of data, the number can be much higher. Therefore, we call on the Russian Federation to respect its obligations under international law and immediately stop deportation of Ukrainian children to its territory or to territories under its control, to immediately notify the names and locations of all already deported children and to provide the opportunity and assistance for their return to Ukraine. The international community is united in addressing this problem, and we appreciate the support and assistance provided to Ukraine in this regard. Taking all of the issues in account, it is essential to focus on strong multi-level cooperation between different states, international organizations, and civil society to gain access to these abducted children, verify the conditions of their detention and safety, and eventually to bring them back home and reunite with their families. Member states have to play a crucial role in supporting Ukraine's efforts to develop a clear and effective legal and political mechanism that will ensure the safe return of Ukrainian children who were illegally deported to Russia. Let us stand together to put an end to this crime and ensure that justice is served for those who were affected and that the perpetrators at all levels are identified and brought to justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Paulo. Next on the list is Mr. André Gómez Reino from Spain, but I do not see him here, so je passe la parole à Monsieur Stéphane Bergeron de la Canada. Stéphane, vous avez la parole. Le micro.
Voilà. Comme vous le savez sans doute, le 17 mars dernier, les juges de la Cour pénale internationale ont pris la décision extraordinaire d'émettre des mandats d'arrêt contre le président russe Vladimir Poutine et Maria Lvova-Belova, sa commissaire aux droits de l'enfant. Ils sont accusés, et je cite, du crime de guerre de déportation illégale de population et du crime de guerre de transfert illégal de population, et ce, de certaines zones occupées de l'Ukraine vers la Fédération de Russie, et on parle ici principalement d'enfants. Les preuves semblent irréfutables. Comme l'a déclaré sans détour le haut-commissaire des Nations unies aux droits de l'homme, M. Volker Turk, devant le Conseil des droits de l'homme le mois dernier, des enfants ukrainiens ont été transférés vers des territoires occupés ou vers la Fédération de Russie. C'est un fait qui a été corroboré dans un bouleversant reportage de New York Times et par le témoignage de femmes courageuses comme Natalia Tchornik qui ont entrepris des périples incroyables dans le but de récupérer leurs enfants. Selon le gouvernement ukrainien, plus de 19 000 enfants ont été transférés de force ou déportés. C'est un chiffre étonnant en soi, mais d'aucuns affirment qu'il pourrait s'élever à 150 000 enfants. C'est tout simplement ahurissant. L'impulsion génocidaire sous-jacente qui motive ces actes ignobles est évidente. L'objectif est clairement de russifier ces enfants et d'annihiler toute leur référence culturelle ukrainienne. Et on ne parle même pas ici de la douleur indicible d'être ici séparés de leurs parents et de celle des familles touchées. À l'instar d'un autre sinistre personnage dont je ne m'abstiendrai de prononcer le nom en cette Assemblée, Vladimir Poutine avait pourtant clairement exprimé sa vision à ce sujet. Dans son essai de 2021 portant sur l'unité historique des Russes et des Ukrainiens, il niait l'existence même du peuple ukrainien et suggérait de manière absurde qu'il était en fait russe. Voilà probablement pourquoi les troupes russes se sont employées dans tous les territoires qu'ils ont occupés à faire disparaître les marques de l'histoire et de la culture ukrainienne. Cette opération de russification des enfants ukrainiens s'inscrit dans le cadre de cette opération, de cette vision perverse. Même si nous savons que l'arrestation du président Poutine et de Mme Lvova-Belova est peu probable, du moins à court terme, je pense qu'il est essentiel que nous fassions preuve d'unité et de détermination dans notre volonté à exécuter ces mandats d'arrêt. À cet égard, il est extrêmement préoccupant et regrettable que le chef de cabinet du premier ministre hongrois, Viktor Orbán, ait déclaré publiquement, dis-je, que la Hongrie n'avait pas l'intention d'y donner suite. Le président serbe, Aleksandar Vučić, s'est même permis de critiquer les mandats d'arrêt. C'est non seulement inacceptable, c'est carrément indécent et irresponsable. Je vous remercie de votre attention.
Merci à vous, cher Stéphane. And now the last speaker in the debate will be Madam Lisa Jasko from Ukraine. Lisa, you have the floor.
Dear colleagues, I'm very grateful to all of you that you're discussing this very heavy topic. I'm very happy that the world is vocal about the crimes that are happening now in Ukraine. But when we talk about present, I also think about the past. The past, at least if we look at the 20th century, and we look at what the Soviet Union was doing to many nations, including Ukrainians. And now we see that at least 20,000 people, children, are kidnapped or taken illegally to Russia. But in the 20th century, there were lots of waves of deportations of different nations, thousands and millions of killed lives, memories. I will tell you that we in Ukraine, in our families, when we, for instance, we talk about the lives of our grandparents, we would know that many of our families, including mine, they had relatives who were sent to Siberia just because they spoke Ukrainian, or they were educated, or they were having some property. We also know that there were at least 3 waves of deportation of Crimean Tatars in the end of 19th century and the 20th century, organized by the Russian Empire and later on by the Soviet Union. When we talk about the consequences of all of this, we know that it's not only about tragedies and traumas of the human lives, but it's also very tragic for the collective historical memory. These generations who go through all of this, they become like stolen generation. And how much healing and reconciliation later on is needed, how much work is needed. And when we talk about all of this, I want you to ask, it's in our hands to make certain tools that will bring justice to these terrible crimes, because we need healing from that crimes. One of the reasons why we in Ukraine keep fighting this, because we know that these crimes that are happening now, they were also happening to our parents, grandparents, to our grandparents, and we want to stop it. We don't want our children to suffer so much also in the future as we suffered in our previous generations. One last thing I want to say about children. We talk about those who are kidnapped, but how many lost their parents? How many are not able to walk freely in the Ukrainian forest because forests are simply mined, and we need demining. It's very complex. It needs healing. It needs lots of efforts for real human recovery. And I'm asking you to do it together with the tool of international law that we are currently discussing here. We need to do this for our future in reconciliation with our memories and with our souls and without hearts, without hatred and without crimes. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. As said, I now have to interrupt the list of speakers. I try to accommodate as many as possible. The speeches of members on the speakers list who have been present during the debate but have not been able to speak may be given to the table office for publication in our official report. I remind colleagues that typewritten text must be submitted electronically no later than 4 hours after the list of speakers is interrupted. I now call Mr. Pisco, the rapporteur, to reply to the debate. Paulo, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, I would like to thank very much all the participation, very especially to the First Lady Olena Zelenska that came to participate in our debate with a very touching testimony, and to all the colleagues that brought here also their testimony in this very important subject. All those that participated, I think, are very, very important to give solid basis to the position of the Council of Europe. I'm very pleased that now we can speak loud and clear about a couple of subjects that I hope they will make their own way in the future. The question of deported children, now we have spoken loud and clear about it. The question of Russification, we have spoken loud and clear about this subject. The question of the need to having the proofs of the crime of genocide, we've spoken loud and clear in this assembly. And I think that is the role of the Council of Europe, to do all this, to be in the side of those that are suffering, and to be in the side of those that are against those, the perpetrators of the crimes of war, all kinds of crimes of war. I think that the Council of Europe comes dignified with this discussion, with this report that belongs to the Assembly, it belongs to all of us. And I believe that many of the colleagues that they could not participate in this debate would like very much also to do it, because this is a subject that touches all of, it's a question of humanity. It's humanity that is in question. And when we come to speaking about crimes of genocide and the Statute of Rome and the Convention Against Genocide are very clear about this and stating that is one of the elements. We are in face of something that is a shame for all humanity. And we must not be sympathetic about these questions. We must be very assertive in name all this situation. We are in face of a state policy, and we have very clearly the proofs that have been given by the Russian political structure, because in his aim to make propaganda, and we have a lot of proofs on this situation. So, dear colleagues, thank you so much for everything. My aim now is that the international community and international organizations could be together in the efforts helping Ukraine in do the most important things, to identify children and to bring them back home, because this is the most important in their own interest. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Rapporteur. Thank you, dear Paulo. Does the Vice Chair of the committee, Mr. Paul Gavin, wishes to speak? You have the floor, Paul. 3 minutes.
Thanks indeed, Mr. President. I want to thank Mr. Pisco for his very strong report this afternoon. I want to thank the Secretariat and particularly thank our colleague Angela Garabashiu for her tremendous contribution to this work. On Monday, colleagues, the Committee on Migration, Refugees and Displaced Persons adopted unanimously the draft resolution and the draft recommendation presented by Mr. Pisco. This demonstrates in the strongest possible terms the decision that our members took to condemn the war of aggression by the Russian Federation against Ukraine. The deportations and forcible transfers of Ukrainian children and other civilians to the Russian Federation or to Ukrainian territories temporarily occupied were carried out by Russia without regard to international humanitarian and human rights law. The Russian Federation should immediately and unconditionally cease unlawful, forcible transfer and deportation of Ukrainian children and other civilians. They should halt any adoption procedures underway and stop the imposition of Russian citizenship. The deported and forcibly transferred Ukrainian children lost everything. Their houses are destroyed, their parents are either killed, injured, imprisoned or displaced, they experience severe trauma, and they will need years to recover. Forcing upon them a language and a culture of the occupant country is not only inhumane and morally wrong, but as so many colleagues have pointed out, it also constitutes a grave breach of international law. Dear colleagues, Ukrainian children must be reunited with their Ukrainian families, with their parents and legal guardians. They need to be able to rebuild their lives in full respect of their country's culture, language and environment they were born into. The resolution is highlighting the specific steps that must be taken in that sense. The Council of Europe member states should continue to use all their influence to help establish and to support mechanisms for reuniting Ukrainian children with their families and legal guardians. States must lend their political, logistical and financial support to the development of an effective and rapid mechanism to identify, locate and repatriate children and other civilians to Ukraine or to a safe third country. The recommendation addressed to the Committee of Ministers draws the attention to all the existing Council of Europe mechanisms that must be used, such as the Council of Europe Action Plan for Ukraine, Resilience, Recovery and Reconstruction. In addition, a specific declaration in the framework of the future summits of heads of state and government of the Council of Europe in Reykjavik, Iceland, must underscore the need to guarantee the effective protection of the rights of children of Ukraine. For this reason, I encourage you, dear colleagues, to wholeheartedly support the draft resolution and the draft recommendation, and I again commend our colleague, Mr. Pisco.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice Chair of the committee, dear Paul. The Committee on Migration, Refugees and Displaced Persons has presented a draft resolution, and you find in document 15748, to which 8 amendments have been tabled, and a draft recommendation, to which 1 amendment has been tabled. Amendments will be taken in order in which they appear in the compendium. I remind you that speeches on amendments are limited to 30 seconds. We will start with the consideration of the draft resolution and will then consider the draft recommendation. I understand that the Vice Chair of the Committee on Migration, Refugees and Displaced Persons wishes to propose to the Assembly that Amendment 2 to the draft resolution, which was unanimously approved by the committee, should be declared as agreed by the Assembly. Is that so, Mr. Gavin? Thank you very much. Does anybody object? If that is not the case, I declare Amendment number 2 to the draft resolution has been agreed. I understand that the Vice Chair of the Committee wishes to propose to the Assembly that Amendments 6, 7, 8 and 3 to the draft resolution, which were rejected by the Committee with a 2/3 majority, be declared as rejected by the Assembly. Is that so, Mr. Gavin? Thank you very much. Does anybody object? Don't see. As there is no objection, I declare that Amendments 6, 7, 8 and 3 to the draft resolution are rejected. I now call Mr. Goncharenko to support Amendment number 5. You have 30 seconds, Alexei.
Thank you very much.
Your microphone.
Thank you very much. First of all, again, great job. And in the report, there is mentioning that, unfortunately, not only to Russian Federation, there is a forceful deportation of children, but also to Belarus. And it means that when we are saying about those who are responsible, about those against whom International Criminal Court should work, about whom the warrants should be issued, it's not just Putin, but also self-proclaimed so-called president of Belarus, Lukashenko, in reality Putin's puppet. So that's why the amendments proposes to add self-proclaimed President Alexander Lukashenko as one of those who should be punished for what's going on. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexei. I have been informed that Mr. Pisco wishes to propose an oral sub-amendment as follows. In Amendment number 5, delete the words "the government of Belarus." In my opinion, the oral sub-amendment is in order under our rules. However, do 10 or more members object the oral sub-amendment to being debated? That is not the case. So I call Mr. Pisco to support his oral sub-amendment. You have 30 seconds, Paulo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This sub-amendment I accept it in the sense that is being written here, presented here, the self-proclaimed president of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, but not the government of Belarus, because in all the references that we have here, they are concrete concerning the responsible for the being accomplice of this situation, of this organization. So we mustn't speak in abstract, but in concrete. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody wish to speak against the oral sub-amendment? I do not see any. What is the opinion of the mover of the main amendment, Alexei?
Yeah, completely support. Thank you.
Thank you. What is the opinion of the committee, Mr. Gavin? Support, broad support. So I now will put the oral sub-amendment to the vote. The vote is open. I close the votes and I ask the results to be displayed. And the oral sub-amendment is adopted. We will now consider the main amendment as amended. Does anybody wish to speak against the amendment as amended? Don't see any. What is the opinion of the committee on the amendment as amended? The support. I shall now put the amendment as amendment number 5 as amended to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the results to be displayed. The amendment is adopted. I now call Madam Komenko to support amendment number 1. You have 30 seconds.
Dear colleagues, does microphone work? Yeah. Dear colleagues, we assume that there can be cases when forcibly deported children, Ukrainian children, to Russian Federation could be adopted by citizens of Council of Europe member states. We would like to prevent this, and we call on the Council of Europe member states to take steps to jointly develop and implement a mechanism to identify, locate, and repatriate such children to Ukraine. Please be careful, dear friends. Thank you.
Thank you. I have been informed that Mr. Pisco wishes to propose an oral sub-amendment as follows. In amendment number 1, delete the words "to take steps to jointly develop and implement a mechanism to identify, locate, and repatriate such children to Ukraine." In my opinion, the oral sub-amendment is in order under our rules. However, do 10 or more members object the oral sub-amendment being debated? I do not see that opposition. So I call Mr. Pisco to support his oral sub-amendment. You have 30 seconds.
Thank you, Chairman. This sub-amendment has a reason, because I accept the first part of this paragraph until citizens of Council of Europe member states, because it makes sense for not to accept adoptions for member states of Council of Europe. But the second part I don't accept because it's already repeated, and the question of working together jointly with the Ukrainian authorities is already in the text. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rapporteur. Does anybody wish to speak against the oral sub-amendment? Don't see any. What is the opinion of the mover of the main amendment?
I agree with the sub-amendment.
You accept the oral sub-amendment. What is the opinion of the committee, Mr. Gavin? Approved unanimously. I will now put the oral sub-amendment to the vote. The vote is open. Vote is closed. I call for the results to be displayed. And the oral sub-amendment is accepted. We will now consider the main amendment as amended. Does anybody wish to speak against the amendment as amended? That is not the case. What is the opinion of the committee on the amendment, Mr. Gavin? Approved unanimously. I now shall put amendment number 1 as amended to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the results to be displayed, and the amendment as amended is adopted. I now call Madam Komenko to support amendment number 4. You have 30 seconds.
Dear colleagues, we need to tackle together the disinformation and propaganda of the Russian Federation, naming deportation of Ukrainian children as bringing them to safety. So we should be careful and we should be conscious about this and prevent this kind of lies in our media space. Thank you.
Thank you. I have been informed that Mr. Pisco wishes to propose an oral sub-amendment as follows. In amendment number 4, replace the words disseminating the truth about Russian crimes with disseminating the facts about Russia's crimes. In my opinion, the oral sub-amendment is in order under our rules. However, do 10 or more members object the oral sub-amendment being debated? I don't see so. So I call Mr. Pisco to support his oral sub-amendment.
Thank you, Chairman. It's correct. The true is something subjective. Facts are something objective. So I ask for the replace of the word true for facts.
Thank you very much. Does anybody wish to speak against the oral sub-amendment? I do not see any. What's the opinion of the mover of the main amendment, Madam Kmenko?
I agree with the proposal of rapporteur. Thank you.
You agree? Thank you very much. What is the opinion of the committee, Mr. Gavin? Unanimously approved. So I now will put the oral sub-amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I ask for the results to be displayed. And the oral sub-amendment is adopted. We will now consider the main amendment as amended. Does anybody wish to speak against the amendment as amended? I don't see any. What is the opinion of the committee on the amendment, Mr. Gavin? Unanimously approved. I shall now put amendment number 4 as amended to the vote, and the vote is open. The vote is closed. I ask for the results to be displayed. And the amendment as amended is adopted. We will now proceed to vote on the draft resolution contained in document 15748 as amended. A simple majority is required. The vote is open. I close the votes and I ask the results to be displayed. And the draft resolution is adopted. We will now consider the draft recommendation to which one amendment has been tabled. I call Madam Zelenska to support amendment number 9. You have 30 seconds, Maria.
Thank you, dear President. As I said in my short intervention, we would like to stress the work of the coordinating council under the President's office, and surely the work of our former colleague of this assembly, who is now an ombudsman for human rights in the Parliament of Ukraine, Dmytro Lubinets. And this, as of today, will be happening due to the Council of Europe program called Help for Education, Human Rights Education for Legal Professionals. Please support, colleagues.
Thank you, Maria. I have been informed that Mr. Pisco wishes to propose an oral sub-amendment as follows. In amendment number 9, replace the words "will be very important" with "can be envisaged." In my opinion, the oral sub-amendment is in order under our rules. However, do 10 or more members object the oral sub-amendment being debated? That is not the case. I call Mr. Pisco to support his oral sub-amendment.
Thank you, Chairman. In fact, I think this amendment proposed is very important to reinforce the cooperation that is needed and the effectivity of the works. But in fact, in the end, we can't qualify this situation as saying it will be very important, can be envisaged. I think is the adequate wording for this.
Thank you, Mr. Pisco. Does anybody wish to speak against this oral sub-amendment? I do not see any. What is the opinion of the mover of the main amendment, Maria?
We fully agree, President.
Thank you so much. What is the opinion of the committee, Mr. Gavin? Unanimous support, so I now will put the oral sub-amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I ask for the results to be displayed. And the oral sub-amendment is adopted. We will now consider the main amendment as amended. Does anybody wish to speak against the amendment as amended? That is not the case. What is the opinion of the committee on the amendment, Mr. Gavin? Unanimous support. I shall now put amendment number 9 as amended to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I ask for the results to be displayed, and the amendment is adopted. That, dear colleagues, brings us now to the final vote on, after this long debate. We will now proceed to vote on the draft recommendation as amended, contained in document 15748. I remind you that a 2/3 majority for a recommendation is required. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the results to be displayed, and the draft recommendation is adopted. Congratulations to the rapporteurs.